Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Hello, Roshni.
Hello, Tom.
Hi. I would like to talk this week about quantity versus quality. I was reading about how with the shorter TV seasons, the question of whether the filler episode is dead or not came up. You know how TV seasons used to be like 20 to 25 episodes?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, too, because it coincides with an article that we were looking at where they were talking about this upcoming pilot season, and it was the smallest amount of pilots I've ever seen picked up. It was like 20 pilots.
Yeah. And it's usually double or triple that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just the broadcast networks.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you have small pilot season and no filler episodes.
Well, you know, I guess that's a whole different discussion almost. In network TV, they're still under the impression that they're doing the normal fall to spring seasons with the mid-season break, as they're still, going through the motions of sticking to the calendar that they've been using for decades. But it's kind of falling apart, and now they're starting to program more year round. Mm-hmm. But the whole, especially with the pandemic, pilot season got totally screwed up. And I think maybe that was going to happen anyway at some point, but the pandemic kind of made it happen sooner.
It really, it accelerated it. Now, when you say filler episode, you're talking like a broadcast season of 22 episodes versus like, a 6-episode run on HBO or something, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Like you have The Witcher on Netflix. It's 8 or 10 episodes, and every episode is super important. It's all serialized. You can't miss an episode or you miss something. But then you get on network TV, you have more procedural type shows where your NCISs and your CSIs and your Law and Orders, where you can kind of watch it in any order. You can watch an episode from any year, and it really wouldn't matter. I mean, there's some large story arcs for some of the characters, but that's like 5% of the episode versus an Amazon show or a HBO show, which are 100% serialized.
Okay, but I would argue that you could even do that with serialized shows. Like, I know what you're talking about with procedurals, because the nature of them is that you can walk away and come back to them and it doesn't matter. But even things like back in the day, like Friends or Seinfeld, there was a story arc, but honestly, I could kind of walk away from Friends and still figure out what was going on, like, 4 or 5 weeks later.
Right. Sitcoms almost always were like that, where they were interchangeable, and, the characters don't change from one episode to another. There's very, very little. I mean, in like a show like Big Bang Theory, obviously when Leonard and Penny get married, that changes things bigger, but it's not something, that the comedy is going to change because of it, that the characters, their relationships might change, but it's not going to change the nature of the episode and the flow of the episode.
Well, here's the question. When did TV, obviously, with streamers and stuff like that, but roughly when would you say the change started happening where the season started shrinking? Was it the rise of streamers, or was it even before then? Like, when did you notice the change?
I think cable kind of started the trend when cable initially was syndication. Okay, and this is kind of where this all comes from, is that you used to have networks do their series. They used to do 25 episodes a season, and you get 4 seasons, you could go into syndication because you had 100 episodes. And then all the syndicated, local TV stations and the cable networks could buy it up and could run blocks of the show, and over, I don't know, however many weeks, but they could run, like, you could take all 100 episodes and run it for 50 weeks, 2 episodes a night, literally, every week or something like that.
And that was sort of the holy grail to be able to reach syndication.
Yeah, that's where the money was. So that's why that was the goal, was to get to 100 episodes. So it wasn't that they had stories to tell that always fit the arc, but it was because they wanted to get that many episodes. It was very monetary. It was very financial. but then you had, the cable networks started to create their own content. That was the big deal. After the initial like kind of reality TV, things like MTV started doing, reality TV and stuff like that. After that, then you start to see things, original programming coming from cable networks like Sci-Fi Channel doing their own series. And then you had like The Walking Dead on AMC. I mean, that's in what, season 11 now?
But even then, the cable network still kind of followed that 22 episode, 25 episode pickup, or they still kind of followed that model, didn't they?
No, not really. Well, Walking Dead, they kind of did, but what they did was they had the season was broken into two parts, and the first half was 10 episodes, and the second half was 10 episodes, and they were like over 2 years. So it was kind of like taking one broadcast season and stretching it further. So they kind of felt like one season, or they were packaged as one season, but they're actually two seasons. And then from there, you get things like Downton Abbey came along, and over I think 4 or 5 seasons, that was only 54 episodes. So that was definitely like 10 to 11 episodes a season, and it was designed that way. So you had those kinds of shows, really huge shows taking off with their shorter episodes and no filler, because they were plot all the way through. There was, in fact, Downton Abbey, I actually got to see Julian Fellows, who wrote it, talked about it. He wrote almost all the episodes. I think there's 2 episodes where he's not credited as the writer. So he literally sat down and wrote like a whole season, and then they went and filmed it. So it's kind of a different process. But those successes, I think, are what led to all the other networks starting to do that, like Game of Thrones. And I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, Mad Men, those kinds of shows.
Which was also AMC, right? Mad Men was AMC.
Another AMC show, yeah.
Cable, yeah.
Yeah. And now everything's like that. The Witcher, Westworld, Mandalorian, all these shows are anywhere from 6, some of them are only 6 episodes, up 8 or 10 or 12 episodes.
Which again, you're still naming cable or streamer shows.
Exactly. They almost all are. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting also is I remember a friend of mine came over here from England, and he had been doing broadcast over there on BBC, and then came here and he landed a couple shows over here. And he thought it was interesting. This is kind of, this is pre-streamer. So like the rise of streamers really hadn't happened. So we were still on that broadcast model. And he thought it was interesting because they get all their scripts over in England already. Like they know the entire season from start to finish. Whereas here in America, and we've discussed this on the show before, the old model was they would write it kind of from week to week. And they didn't necessarily know where the story was going to go, which also helps add to that filler issue.
Right.
Because you don't have the entire story.
Right. They start writing, I think, actually start writing in like, is it August? They start writing usually for the fall. And then the shows premiere in like September, October. So they start about 6 weeks ahead of time. And then they get those episodes done. Then as the episodes are being produced, it kind of catches up to the writing, where they're writing an episode like almost the week before it's being shot.
And they're still filming. Yeah. Whereas opposed to like, for example, like in England, he was saying they already knew everything. They had shot the entire season and it was done, versus just what you're saying, where they're like, okay, now here's the script for next week's episode. Great example is soap operas. They really don't know what's going on. Sometimes they'll make changes like the day of,
Right.
Talk about filler episodes, right?
Right. Well, I always joke that soap operas, you can stop watching them for about 4 or 5 months and come back and you've missed about 5 minutes of soap opera time.
But see, also interestingly enough, there's very few soap operas left.
I haven't even paid attention to see.
I believe there's
filming.
only one left.
Ah.
I believe so. I
Days
think,
of Our Lives, probably.
I believe it's Bold and the Beautiful. I believe Young and the Restless went out. I'd have to do the research, but I know that they've been slowly kind of fading off, or their seasons are shorter, or whatever. But yeah, because there was a big deal about it. Soaps were kind of dying off a few years ago, and they'd been going forever, 20, 30 years, But yeah, there just isn't a market for them anymore, because the stay-at-home mom taking care of the kids, afternoon watching, like it's not happening anymore.
Well, yeah, and the whole daytime drama is kind of like the category is just gone. It's been replaced by reality TV and talk shows and cable.
I'll be honest, like I don't even know what's on a broadcast block, because everything we watch now is through Netflix or Hulu or whatever. So I couldn't even tell you what a broadcast typical day looks like. anymore. Whereas when I was a kid, I could be like, oh yeah, the morning news, and then there's this, and then the lunchtime news, and there's the afternoon soaps. You know what I'm saying? You don't know anymore because everything is streaming.
Right. Back to prime time though.
But it makes a difference. All of that plays into
Yeah.
it.
Mhm. Well, the prime, a lot of daytime was syndicated shows, right? So that's, so what do they have to fill their hours with now if they don't have those syndicated shows? Used to get the late afternoon blocks of things like Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, and those kind of like Cheers and Frasier. Those kind of filled in your almost like your pre dinner hour is where those came in, like for anywhere from 4 to 6 or 7 o'clock. So those syndicated shows aren't there, well, those, they still make those sitcoms, so they still have them, but the other, what do you call them, like local channels that used to program entirely with syndication, they basically got gobbled up by other kind of mini networks. Trying to think of like the names of them are, but they have like these, networks of locally owned channels, or like someone might own all the stations in Ohio or whatever, and they would then program for those, so it's less independent and more regional.
You know what I'd be interested, and the numbers haven't really been released because those streamers are tricky. But back in the day when you did have things running on syndication, the other thing that that meant for the actors and the writers was royalty money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if those things, I mean, the people on Friends, they don't ever have to work again because it went into syndication, and oh my gosh, they're just making so much off of the reruns, you know? But the thing with I like succinct storytelling. Like I don't necessarily binge watch cable or streamers, but sometimes I do. I like succinct storytelling, but if I watch all 6 episodes of The Witcher season 2, I'm not going to go back and watch them. But I would be more likely to watch them if I just happen to have my TV on and they were running. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You with
Yeah.
the way streamers and cable are, you have to search it out. And I don't know if people really watch them over and over again.
No, well, and that's the funny thing about the filler episodes that are being lost in this whole thing, is they were almost like a refresher course. You could, and sometimes they would have these clip episodes. Do you remember clip episodes?
You mean like the two-parters?
No, not two parters. Was like a season break.
Define clip episode then. I don't know if I've heard that
This
term.
is really interesting. Okay, so a clip episode is where um, it may not even be the main characters, but there's some characters in the episode retelling what's been going on in the series, and they refer to clips of things that happened in previous episodes. It's kind of like almost like you take a couple characters and you trap them somewhere, like we're in a cave or we're in an elevator stuck here, and they're reminiscing. And they say, "Do you remember when we did this?" And then they literally play a clip from that episode.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh.
it's like they're telling a story using pieces of episodes before it. And those are the biggest filler episodes, were the clip episodes.
I don't know if I've ever like what show did that? Can you remember one?
Oh gosh,
Because I've
I'm trying to
never
remember.
seen that, and I watched a lot of like old TV.
I maybe they didn't. They may not have syndicated those episodes because they were like, that's kind of like redundant to syndicate an episode that's just replaying other episodes. But I definitely remember it in some sci-fi stuff, like Stargate would do it
Uh huh.
occasionally. And these are things where basically what's happened is there's always a point at which the actors have in their contracts, and you probably know this more than I do, that they do a certain number of episodes, and they at least get a certain number of episodes off,
Mm-hmm.
and or certain supporting characters get a chance to be the main character in a story. So
Yeah.
the other characters then get time off as well. And a lot of times those are the episodes that are quote unquote filler, because the main characters aren't there to carry along the long arc of the series.
The
So
main
you get,
storyline,
yeah,
yeah.
so you kind of get a ship in a bottle story, is something else they call it. Like it's a very self-contained story that can go anywhere. They can even do it out of order and it won't matter.
Well, I was just thinking what you're saying about the clip episode and going back to like royalties might be lost now because they aren't running shows in syndication on streaming. How would you even divide royalties in a clip episode? Like, does it go to the writer and the actors reminiscing, but then you also have the clip, like the royalties from the clip you used? Like, how would you even divvy that up?
Right. No, well, that's a good point. If you're going to use if you're using footage, then yeah, do you have to compensate them for that? I'm trying to see. It looks like a lot of sitcoms did it. I just did a quick Google, but a lot of sitcoms would do them as well. You know, kind of giving a supporting character the lead, and then they would use
Mhm.
the clips to fill in the story.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, yeah. That, and then there was always when I was growing up, there was the anthology series,
Oh, you mean like, Twilight Zone or something?
like a Twilight Zone, or not even that, but like the Fantasy Island or Love Boat, the
Oh, yeah.
originals, where
Yeah.
each episode had guests. They were all guest stars on the episode. So you
Mhm.
had the main character, Mr. Rourke, and his staff at the island for Fantasy Island, or you had the crew on the ship, and they were there every episode. But the real stories were about the people who came to the island or the ship,
Yep.
and so you had these little two or three stories going on each episode.
I'd say Murder, She Wrote was similar.
Yeah, Murder She Wrote.
Yeah.
They're kind of like procedural before procedurals were a thing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like, they sort of built on the characters, the main characters' backstories, but not really, because that wasn't the point.
No, it really had very little to do with the main characters. The recurring characters were actually less important. They were kind of facilitators to the plot of the guest stars.
Mhm.
That was a really unique kind of show that doesn't really exist anymore.
I mean, but I would think, like, there is so much content out there these days. Because even if you don't wanna watch broadcast, you can go to cable, and if you don't want cable, you can go to streamers, and if you don't want streamers, you can go to YouTube, and if you don't want YouTube, there's a bazillion, like, YouTube-esque type sites out
Yeah,
there as well. So there's so much content, so I'm sure that's why they're like, "Okay, we can't have fluff because who's gonna watch it?" Whereas
right.
before, when you had broadcasting, you only had a handful of channels anyway, you had people's attention because remember back in the day, watching TV was an event. Remember Survivor? And people would have Survivor parties
Hmm.
because it's like, if you missed it, you missed it, so, like, let's all gather around the
Ah,
TV Sunday night at 7 or whatever time it aired. But now it's like, who cares? I can just always catch it later, when it's on streaming. So I don't know if people have those epic watch parties anymore. I kind of feel like I know people used to have them for Game of Thrones, but I don't know if there's anything recently.
not no, not, they had watch parties for Walking Dead because I went to a few.
I mean, obviously this all pre-pandemic too, but
Yeah. No, but I mean, that goes way back to the days of you had, 25 people watching, Cheers. There's 25 million people watching Cheers. So the audience is so fragmented now, like you said, that the studios and networks have focused on, I want to say they've kind of focused on either high quality, bigger budget shows. I mean, you look at a lot of the stuff that's on HBO Max and
mhm.
on Disney Plus, and these shows are not cheap. They've got special effects. They got, their fantasy style, their sci-fi.
Oh yeah, we got Lord of the Rings coming. Did it
Lord of the
already
Rings is
air?
no, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
But we have the new Boba Fett show coming out on Disney Plus for Star Wars.
Wheel of Time, also high
Wheel of Time
fantasy.
was, so they've really started to figure, like, and like you said, like, do event things. They also tend to get bigger actors because they're shorter runs, and the bigger actors are willing to commit to a 6 episode series, or maybe an 8 episode series, but they don't want to do 20 something episodes. Obviously, I
Well,
think
I
I just
don't know
heard
if
Kevin
you've
Costner was offered a deal for a short run
I don't know
show
if
of some
you've
kind.
noticed either, but I mean, obviously, this is now going on the acting side. First of all, there's always been a thing. There was always TV actors and film actors, and they never really intersected, very rarely. But now, obviously, because there's less jobs, film actors will go down to TV, right? Before it was like maybe you could use TV as a stepping stone to get to film, and that was like, oh. But if
Mm-hmm.
you, and I mean, I don't necessarily expect you to read the credits or know what's happening, but also, there are TV casting directors and film casting directors, and they usually don't overlap. And if you read the credits, the people who cast for streamers are film casting directors.
Are they really? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
I noticed that and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I'm sure like there's overlap now and TV casting directors are, going in that direction and blah, 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 blah. But it's interesting because the names you see on streamers are usually people who cast for film.
It's not unusual, like similar to that, to see big movie directors directing TV pilots too.
Hmm.
That's happened, yeah. Because and the director who directs the pilot, if the show gets picked up, gets big money, even if they don't stick around. Yeah, that's not unusual, especially things like when they did 24, that was a big one.
Hmm.
But for TV writers, obviously it makes things even more confusing for us as writers because while there's more shows being made, they're all shorter seasons, and we've talked about this before with the WGA and how it's kind of like that's unpredictable, because especially with the pilot season kind of falling apart, you don't know when you're going to be working or how long you're going to be working. Some shows might run for 8 months, some might run for 10 months, and it kind of makes it harder to put together a solid schedule of when you're going to be working and not.
And also, like I mentioned, royalties might be changing because of how people consume media. And so that also has to be figured out in the equation as well. Because before, you could count on your royalties, right? You hit syndication, but
Mm-hmm.
now you can't necessarily count on that. And streamers aren't necessarily forthcoming with the numbers.
Well, and yeah, in fact, I think I just saw a YouTube video of a writer opening his residual checks, his royalty checks, just to kind of like show everyone this is what it's like, when he gets his checks. And some things are for $20 and some things are for a couple $100. But he's like, the shows he does for streaming, nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
He doesn't get anything from that. And because there's no extra money in that. There's no, like, when you do a syndication deal, you're getting money for that deal. So that's why that money can be calculated out, for all the people involved as far as all the residuals go.
And because we're going off of old models, they
Right.
haven't figured it out yet. Yeah. Which is a shame.
So I haven't even looked to see what the syndication, dollar amounts are. I assume there's still a lot of international syndication because American shows still get sold overseas. But as we've seen on YouTube and as well as on Netflix, that's driving a lot of local production now in
Hmm.
regionalized localization, where they're making tons of content in the countries that they're streaming in, so that they're not just dubbing American shows for other countries. So that's going to take away from our ability to then expand the market for American shows. Because they're, quantity kind of thing. How much are you going to need?
I think we won't be able Yeah, I think we won't be able to see really how things work as far as long term in the industry until, and I hate to say it, until after the pandemic is really not over, but like contained, because we still have all this stop and start of like, productions are going, no, they're not. What's going on? Like all this stuff. And so I think once the pandemic becomes commonplace and we know how to live with it, then we'll see what happens as far as like streamers and broadcasts, and it'll shake out because right now you still kind of have to rely on watching a movie at home and stuff like that. So once that gets once the pandemic is taken out of the equation, I think that'll really help, but they need to figure out sooner rather than later because it's also been dragging on for 3 years.
Right. And it's aggravated things even more because 5 years ago, this was kind of this issue of things going to streamers was just starting, and now it's full blown
Yeah.
to where I don't know if there's a network that doesn't have a streaming platform of its own at this point. Every network is connected to some streaming platform. I think Sony is one of the only only studios or networks that doesn't have a streaming platform.
And we've discussed how I feel about the myriad of streaming platforms.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, and it's just going to become a bigger problem. So I think that I think that's going to be the next big thing to tackle for maybe the studios themselves would like to see something more structured back in place. Kind of like you have to take what the system and break it really bad before you can rebuild it.
Mm.
Maybe we're in that breaking part right now. But I think it has to come back to some sort of sense of order from all this chaos. And maybe the unions will be the thing to drive that, the WGA and the actors, the Yahtzee and the actors, the SAG and AFTRA can help drive that because it affects everybody. Obviously,
Yeah.
if we don't have a standardized schedule like the pilot season, how do you manage it? It's insane. You could be working on one show for 4 months or 5 months and then be done with it, but the show that you were going to go work on next is already filming, so you can't go on it. It's like the overlaps and the breaks between them are just too crazy to manage.
Yeah.
I feel like someone's going to have to get together and say, you know what, this is all exciting, all this dynamic growth and change we've had, but now let's all sit down and figure out, can we go back to some sort of system or, that helps us all manage this better? And it really would be better for the studios too, because you think about studio space and scheduling actors and directors and producers and crews, it's all, up in the air. It's all scrambled right now. Yeah. So it should be better for everybody if they get their act together. I think there's a lot of money like coming from things like HBO and Netflix and Disney now, spending billions of dollars on content. They used to not spend themselves. They used to just buy their shows from other studios or other production companies. I think that flood of money and that rush to build content for all the new streamers is what has driven this chaos. And I think at some point, hopefully that'll all kind of massage out and settle down, and people will say, let's put together a plan that works for all of us. Because while we're competing, we still have to, utilize the same resources, people resources and physical resources.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Well, what do you guys all think? Let us know in the comments. You can find us online at writersgrouptherapy.com and also on Twitter at WGTherapy, and let us know online, and we will see you guys soon.